Let's analyze what was once hailed as the new gold standard for anime, despite doing nothing out of the ordinary and eventually squandering all its good ideas. If there is one thing the first chapter does well, that would be the victimizing of the protagonist. This is very important in shonen, since it becomes relatable to anyone who has a loser mentality. And guess how many people read manga because they want to escape a reality where they are losers? Thus, the more you make him seem like a victim, the more people root for him, even if later on he does some pretty shitty things. The first chapter also establishes the setting being both a utopia and a dystopia, meaning it doesn't really have an identity. It's a piece of paper that can be interpreted however the hell you want to. This page, for example, shows the superheroes being cool because they have superpowers, with which you can do a lot of cool things. At the same time, they do it for fame and money, which makes them sellouts. So, are they good or are they evil? It's whatever you feel like at the moment. Like most modern stories, it doesn't have an overall meaning or a specific type of morality, and it's why it fails in the long run. Nothing matters as a whole, it's just people with cool superpowers you have to be in support of, because everyone in the story is in support of. As a concept, there is nothing wrong with that as long as the characters follow this premise. And that's the first big issue you see right away. They don't. The protagonist wants to be a hero just to help people, he doesn't care about fame and money. Why is that? Not explained. Although heroism is about being selfless, it's also something that exists only after you have successfully done a lot of good. If you really want something and you think a school diploma can make you a hero without doing anything actually heroic first, then it becomes selfish. You also get situations like the rival of the story constantly mocking everyone, torturing the protagonist in the middle of the class, before all the students and the teachers, and he is still the best candidate to enter the Hero Academy, despite clearly acting like a villain. But since nobody points that out in this scene, and only shows students and teachers doing nothing, while a child is constantly being tortured and then told to go end his life in broad daylight, the mindless audience simply accepts it. By the way, school bullying is treated in a most comical way, since we are supposed to think Deku never informs an adult about it so something can be done, or that bullying is acceptable and normalized. So it's either Deku loves being tortured since he does nothing to stop it, or bullying is not a bad thing in story, therefore there is nothing dramatic about it, and he's just a crybaby. Yet the audience didn't think like that, they believed bullying in the story is bad despite nobody doing anything about it, while at the same time they voted Bakugo as the most popular character. Yes, the fandom was so dumb they didn't like bullying, yet loved the awful bully the most. That's what moral relativism does to your brain. My Hero Academia was never about real heroism, the same way Naruto was never about real ninjas and One Piece was never about real pirates. It was just people with superpowers needing an excuse to do cool shit. Anything related to heroism was just shallow dressing. The premise of the entire story stinks right from the very first chapter, yet the audience was tricked into thinking Deku deserves to be the greatest hero just because he really wants it and is being victimized. On top of that, since Deku doesn't have any superpowers, in a world where almost everyone has superpowers, he essentially becomes a metaphor for people with disabilities. The cripple, the blind, the autistic, and of course the queers. This here is why so many queers were attracted to the show and why the community became so toxic. Everyone who doesn't know the difference between good and evil, and anyone who thinks being queer is a disability because you are being bullied for it, dashed towards this manga. And since almost all of them were leftists and progressives, and the creators of the manga never did any gatekeeping, this shithole of a community was the result. Hundreds of thousands of relativists appropriated it, and began drawing gay porn about Bakugo impregnating Deku, because he is disabled like they are, so he has to be queer. Does that make any sense? No, but that's what moral relativism is all about. It's also why Mina is black. She's clearly pink but she's black because we appropriated it. The same way Piccolo is green but he's also black because the blacks who feel marginalized in a world where most white males don't abandon their children, also appropriated him. That's what happens when you embrace relativism, especially in a show that is supposed to be about heroism and they don't do any gatekeeping, especially in a world where Tumblr and Twitter were unchecked cesspools of terminally online idiots. You're not being a nice guy when you let everyone come in your fandom. Nothing is for everyone, and a lot of people are queers and leftists. They are not here to build a healthy community, they are here to destroy everything they touch. And yet you invited them in with this garbage and you did nothing to kick them out. What did you expect will happen? Back to this awful manga, there's this ridiculous string of plot conveniences where Deku gets attacked by a villain, gets conveniently saved by his favorite hero, who conveniently doesn't take the villain to custody, who then gets conveniently freed by Bakugo, and Deku conveniently tries to save him before the same hero from before conveniently saves them again. This is anything but good writing, especially when it's all happening in the same chapter. When the foundations of the story are so awful right from the beginning, it tells you right away that this is gonna be a terribly written manga. Yet for a whole decade and up until the finale, a lot of people refused to believe it. Anyone who noticed it early on was labeled a hater who never gave the manga a chance. Have faith in Horikoshi. Let him cook. Everything will make sense in the end. Not when it begins like that, it won't. If the writing is so bad right away, it is never going to improve. It will be just an endless line of conveniences that will be justified with moral relativism to be whatever you feel like at the moment. You see it again when Deku rushes to save Bakugo from the villain with absolutely no plan. Instead of the narrative portraying this as a dumb move, it wants you to think Deku is a real hero, because he wants to help people even if he endangers himself and the victim is his school bully. This is not heroism, okay? If you jump in a burning building to save someone and you end up dying, you're not a hero. You are a hero if you manage to save someone that way. Heroism demands achievements, and there is none here. Deku did not save Bakugo, he was a complete idiot. This also clashes with Deku being someone who is supposed to be using his brain. He keeps notes about everything, and the narrative makes you think he's gonna be a mastermind who uses his brain instead of rushing to danger and using brute force. That never happened. He never used his brain. He was just Texas smashing his problems away, and yet the narrative will insist he is super smart. It was enough to fool most in the audience as well. It never denied it, and thus neither did they. They kept saying he's smart and uses his brain because he keeps notes. The first chapter ends with Deku openly telling us the entire manga is a flashback. He ends up becoming the greatest hero in the end, so the manga literally spoils the ending. Aesthetically, this was done to hook the audience into remaining interested in the manga at a point when Deku is a complete loser. Nobody wants to follow losers in fighting shonen, and this spoiler lets you know that he is a winner, so don't give up on it. You are not gonna waste your time following a loser. It sounds like a positive thing, but it also completely ruined all the tension. Part of the charm of any action series is not knowing if the protagonist makes it in the end. We are expected to believe he will win, not that he will surely win. The unknown is part of the charm. There is nothing to be excited about Deku, which is also why he ends up becoming boring after the secondary cast gets introduced. He's no longer the underdog because we know he won. It's the others we don't know if they succeed or if they survive, so they automatically become more interesting to follow than the protagonist. And since we are in spoiler mode now that the manga is over and the ending is out, I can openly tell you that this premise you see here of Deku becoming the greatest hero was a troll. He ended up being a wage slave that nobody knows if he exists, and nobody even bothers to pay him a visit. How is this supposed to be the greatest hero? Especially when the line was changed to how everyone became the greatest hero. So technically Deku didn't win anything. On top of that, if everyone is the greatest hero, then nobody is the greatest hero, especially him, who was left with no powers while everybody else became rich and famous. Thus this spoiler that the manga used so that people won't give up on it was actually a lie. Everybody was tricked into following a manga to the end with a lie. And yet there were many who were fooling themselves to think that it all made sense and nobody knows how to read. Oh yes, we know how to read, sir. When you make a promise and you break it, You are making everyone who trusted you to feel stupid and excused if they attack you. And that's why My Hero Academia was complete garbage right from the very beginning. After the pilot chapter, All Might agrees to give Deku his powers because he considers him a worthy successor. As always, Horikoshi has no idea what heroism is actually all about, to the point he makes the greatest hero being oblivious to the fact that a moron running to help someone is not heroic. If Deku had succeeded, that would help, and if he had survived, that would be even better, since he would have actually used his brain. But Deku failed at everything, therefore he was not heroic and does not deserve anything. But then again, All Might is not a hero either, since he is supposed to be preaching heroism on a daily basis, and he embodies all the ideals everyone is supposed to mimic, yet did nothing to prove it's not about fame or money, and allowed everyone to only care about those two things. And thus the theme of heroism can be whatever continues with Deku becoming the successor because the plot said so, instead of giving the power to Mirio, someone who is actually heroic and truly worthy of the power. But then again, this is not a story about heroism, it's a shallow empowerment fantasy that panders those who feel marginalized by society, the cripples and the queers, people who constantly demand privileges without deserving them and wish to have all the power and all the fame without working for them. Obviously, the narrative tries to trick you into thinking Deku is not handed over the power and he has to actually train hard for it first. He spends 10 months in preparing his body and he has to try much harder than everyone else, therefore it's not like he was gifted the power. In this regard, he did try somewhat to be worthy of it, but the fact is, even if he had worked decades for it, he is not heroic, he's an idiot running to danger and failing. Also, he did absolutely no training before he was promised the power. When on one hand you have someone like Mirio training his body his whole life without any rewards, and on the other Deku who did it for a few months and only because he was promised the power, you see how this is all selfish and no more than lazy empowerment fantasy. I can also mention Black Clover, a different manga about a similar protagonist who also didn't have any powers, yet he trained his body for years without being promised the ultimate power as a reward. As always, almost none in the audience wanted to admit that, because the story didn't point it out, it was only telling you Deku is heroic and he deserves everything, because he was bullied at school and was pulling trash for a few months. That is more than enough, right? No, they were completely fooled to accept nonsense. When you don't criticize what you read and blindly accept everything you're told, this is the result. By the way, it's extremely lazy to have a character with disabilities like Deku, and the only way you can think of in order to give him a fighting chance against non-disabled people is to take away his disability. If the disability is what makes him stand out, making him just like everyone else doesn't make him stand out. I remember how everyone at first believed he would mitigate his lack of a quirk with gadgets, and then he would use his brain to defeat with deception enemies who are far more powerful than him. Basically, they believed he would be anime Batman, and not yet another privileged minority who gets far more than he deserves. The thing is, it takes effort to make a character who fights differently, and even more effort to actually make him smart. Horikoshi had no idea how to write such a character, so he just gave Deku a quirk that one-shots his enemies with absolutely no tactics and called it a day. This way he pandered even more the queers watching this bullshit by affirming their tactics of constantly demanding more privileges and bullying anyone who thinks they don't deserve them. In fact, he even pandered the lies and deception they often use to get those privileges. By making Deku hiding the truth from everyone, he had to constantly lie about how he got the superpower. And even the way he got the power was cheating, since normally you can't transfer superpowers from one person to the next. You are born with it and that's the end of it. If you are the only one who can take powers from others, you are functioning on a completely different level. It becomes the same thing as doping, which is illegal in official sports events. An instant boost in abilities and very unfair to anyone who doesn't use doping and instead trains for years to get where he is. Thus the narrative once again wants you to think lying, bending the rules and using drugs is heroic as long as you get what you desire. See that, kids? Keep bullying and harassing and lying and using drugs and hide the truth from everyone. They will give you money and you'll become famous. That's what your favorite disabled hero does, and it's very heroic. Anyways, after Deku is rewarded with a power he doesn't deserve and lies about how he got it, he's sent to the entrance exam for the Hero Academy. There, he uses it for the first time to save someone, which ends up giving him enough hidden points to pass the exam. It sounds fine on paper, passing the exam by helping another person, until you start thinking how none of it has anything to do with heroism. You don't become a hero by getting enough points. You either do something heroic or you don't. Points are meaningless. Also, hiding the actual way you can pass a test or hiding the rules of a competition is unfair. Imagine studying for years and memorizing everything regarding a test. You perform exactly as you should, and then you are told you failed because of rules nobody outside the teachers knew they existed. That is not fair, is it? Neither is using nepotism to get into a competition you normally wouldn't be in. And what is Deku if not a nepo baby who uses his surrogate father All Might to give him privileges nobody else gets? Where would he be without All Might making it easy for him? Keeping notes about superheroes is useless, and he didn't train a single day without being promised a power. How would he pass the test on his own? What a nice moral message to kids reading this. You will never achieve something with your own powers or efforts. It will always be thanks to your surrogate father giving you privileges that others deserve more. The test is also really messed up, since it requires from a participant to be in grave danger against his will, and to assume there will be another participant willing to save him. So what would have happened if that girl hadn't been trapped under a rubble? There would be no way to tell who is willing to help others. What if nobody tried to save her? Would she have been killed? If the teachers could interfere and save her in time, Deku didn't really save her, since she was never in real danger and therefore he was not being heroic. Also, if the teachers waited until the last second before saving her, means they were deliberately not doing anything and endangered the life of an innocent in order to promote their agenda with sinister methods. If they hide rules and endanger lives in a school test, it is all bullshit and has nothing heroic about it. Here is where we find out Deku breaks his arms whenever he is using his superpower. That makes it seem like there are consequences for using his quirk, therefore it's not gonna be easy here on. It is still done superficially since there are no actual negative consequences. No matter how many times he breaks his arms, they will be instantly healed with a simple recovery kiss ability. And no matter how many times they keep saying his arms will eventually be unable to heal, that never happens. You don't get a gradual inability to be harder to write or hold something as evidence of permanent and incurable damage. All the mangaka did was draw a few scars on his fingers as supposed proof of his power having a toll on him. That's more than enough to prove his point, isn't it? No, because it doesn't mean anything. It was just fake tension that ended up disappointing everyone when the story ended. Everyone was saying Deku would be crippled by the time the story ends, thus heroism comes with sacrifices. Yet he defeated the final villain with a punch, as he does with everyone else, and he was still able to use his hands normally in the epilogue. Thus another troll by Horikoshi shit who can't even stay true to his own ideas. He will constantly introduce threats that can completely destroy a student's career or possibly kill someone, and will then take it away since he was never committed to actually destroying or killing someone. As much as many say killing doesn't make a story more mature, not killing anyone despite constantly making it seem like it's possible is just as lame. If you don't intend to kill someone, don't give the assumption that you will. Fake tension that is used to keep the audience engaged can only work a few times before nobody can believe someone is in actual danger. Nobody will care when the final arc begins. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Another thing he will constantly do is have training arcs. Half of the manga feels like tensionless exercises where nobody is in real danger and simply exhibits how he can use his quirk. As much as it's needed for the secondary characters to show to the audience what they are capable of, spending half of the entire story on characters who eventually don't matter, and let's be honest, very few ended up being relevant to the plot, automatically makes half of the manga to be completely skippable. Also, when you read a story about powerful fighters, you just wanna see them fight. You don't wanna see them train. In fact, training in fighting shonens is generally speaking a very boring part if there is no real threat or pressure of time. Goku training to fight the Saiyans managed to do that. Kenshin training to fight Shishio managed to do that. My Not Heroic Academia completely failed. The only good part in this training session was a flashback that explained why the school bully was such an asshole, but even that was a typical case of superiority complex. I was born great and the others suck. The end. There are so many who act like that out there, and they are all the same type of asshole. It still doesn't excuse all the terrible things he did all these years and how uncaring he was to everyone or how he was torturing children in broad daylight. In general, all the characters were simple archetypes, and what Bakugo got was still much more than what the rest got. And spending an entire arc just to flesh out a single character is just not worth it. The rest of the students were there just to eat up pages by mostly repeating the exact same one-trait joke that defines them, and without ever being needed in the plot. They are essentially filler, and some of them are outright creeps. If Bakugo got a lot of flashbacks to excuse his behavior, a lot less was given to sexual harassers like Mineta, who exists just for bottom-tier sex comedy. Although most anime have one such character, this one is supposed to be hero material. He is supposed to be acting like a hero, and yet he spends the whole series in being a deviant. Why was he even chosen in the first place? Because he got a lot of points in the entrance exam? How did he even get points when all he does is crying, throwing sticky balls, and being a creep around women? Why wasn't he expelled along the way for his behavior? This is why these tests are a joke and have nothing to do with heroism. By the way, this is when villains attack for the first time and during a supposed safe school environment. They raise the stakes since now there is actual danger, yet they fail to kill, much less harm, a single rookie hero. Despite using tactics and deception, they are all defeated rather easily with brute force by a bunch of first-year students instantly coming off as incompetent. Meaning there is still zero tension and the villains only exist to hype up the heroes instead of ridiculing the hero society and criticizing its obsession with fame and money. There is no social critique here as was the initial intent, it's just dumb action. Get used to it, since this is what the manga is going to be for most of its run. So, villains attacked the school, caused a lot of property damage, and endangered the lives of the students. What is the logical step that should happen next? The parents being worried about the lives of their children? The media accusing the academy of not doing a good job? The criminals that were captured going through interrogation so they will reveal the location of the hideout of those who have escaped? The answer is a school festival! Go home, people, ignore everything that just happened and move to the next thing. This is what Horikoshi will be doing all the time. All the nasty beats will be ignored and all the interesting plot points will be forgotten for hundreds of chapters in favor of more school activities.
This right here is an example of masterful storytelling.
This is where the manga blew up in popularity because the school festival was presented as a tournament arc, something which every shonen tard loves to read about.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important message. Tournament arc!
And if that sounds less exciting than what happened a few pages ago when villains attacked and almost killed everyone, remember it's all about moral relativism. It's what the narrative tells you and not what you're supposed to be thinking. There is a huge audience at the school festival. There was no audience during the villain attack. Everyone is cheering the students at a school festival. Nobody was cheering the students during the villain attack.
Hi! 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 Hi!
And that is why this tensionless arc comes off as more important than the life or death situation of the previous arc.
Tournament arc! Tournament arc! It's a fucking tournament arc! Tournament arc!
Bakugo proclaims he will win in this festival and he does so, instantly becoming the most popular character in the series. It doesn't matter if he's being completely disrespectful to other students, or not heroic at all with his attitude, or torturing children in broad daylight. What matters is that he's a badass, and he's not afraid to be rude, and he won, and everyone cheers for him. Because fighting shonen are empowerment fantasies. They are tickling the audience's desire to be the winner, the most famous, and the most powerful. They're not about telling you becoming a wage slave that nobody knows if you exist somehow makes you the greatest hero!
How Kohei Horikoshi pulled together a masterpiece like this is the question that we are all trying to ask.
Which is why Deku failing to be number one in this festival, despite being the protagonist, is not some sort of a subversion as every dick rider was yapping about at the time.
Manages to break the mold of what we've come to expect from the genre.
Deku didn't lose anything since it was just an unimportant school festival. And he still used the power of friendship on Todoroki, which was more important than getting a participation trophy.
Deku hasn't had many winning battles, and the wins he has had have usually come at a great cost to his physical health.
Plus, we are told he wins at the end, so it's not like we were made to think he would remain a loser forever. Which was a lie because he was a loser at the end, but that is not what we were told to expect.
He will more than likely be the best hero ever in the end.
What was also bullshit was how he was very stressed out by how everyone antagonized him for doing well in the festival. That was supposed to make him relatable to the audience, since being strong meant fierce competition and anxiety, just like in school or workforce. What the audience was overlooking, because the narrative wasn't pointing it out, was that Deku was cheating the whole time. While everyone else was competing fair and square with the powers he was born with, he wasn't using his powers. He was using a quirk that was given to him and which gave him a tremendous advantage over everyone else. It was essentially doping, let's not pretend it was something else. Every sport competition has banned steroids because they were giving an unfair advantage to anyone using them over anyone who wasn't using them. Plus, they are destroying your body in the long term. And what is one for all if not the greatest of steroids? It gives you a tremendous advantage and it destroys your body. And remember, just like every athlete who used doping during a competition, Deku was keeping it a secret. He wasn't telling anyone he was using steroids.
Deku, though, has neither the luxury of time or the luck of your standard main character.
This is where moral relativism popped up again, with every fanboy excusing it as if it was fine to be given the opportunity to compete with the other athletes. That is what everyone caught using steroids are saying. I was only doing it to be given a fair advantage. Yes, by lying, cheating, breaking the rules and hiding the truth. So to hell with Deku and anyone who found him relatable in this event because of anxiety. He was cheating, he wasn't even supposed to be there. Who cares if he was stressful? It feels even more of a scam when there are students that literally dropped out on their own in the final event because they didn't find it fair to be there after they were brainwashed or immobilized. These people gave up on their chance to win out of proper etiquette. And Deku was standing there cheating all the way and he said nothing. What kind of a hero would do that? It is once again proven that anyone who identified with Deku was no different from the cripple and the queers who want to cheat their way to success just because they think they deserve it. Gee, I wonder why this manga attracted so many people. Well, screw them and screw Deku.
Deku is better than Naruto and Luffy. He doesn't stumble into success, he plans for it.
Also, it's not like the winners got something out of all this fuss, despite constantly saying they're gonna get a lot of job opportunities in the future that way. We never see it, because that's what Horikoshi does. He never uses his own plot threads properly. Therefore, plot-wise, this arc didn't have any plot significance. It was just an excuse to show the students rivaling each other and expositioning their backdrops, but it otherwise had no continuity with what happens immediately after. You can't even say it was good setup for things to come, because aside from Todoroki, the rest of the students never played any part and their backdrops meant nothing.
The main supporting characters all have a unique personality with an interesting backstory.
Also, can you fanboys shut the hell up about this stupid manga subverting gender roles? There are hundreds of articles out there about Deku breaking the mold of boys don't cry, or girls not being platonic girlfriends because they have agency. Uraraka in specific was the poster child of a strong and dynamic female character. She's not useless like Sakura and she has her own goals.
Skillfully subverts our expectations.
This manga has done absolutely nothing different with its female characters. They are all constantly sexualized and they are all there just as fuel for shipping wars. Uraraka included. Her goal to make money for her family was eventually replaced with nothing more than her being Deku's fangirl. And I won't even call her a girlfriend, because as the ending proved, Deku was just an unmarried wage slave. What follows their not tournament arc is the students teaming up with pro heroes for acquiring field experience. Outside of Deku it was a complete waste of time. Big sucker there, Horikoshi wasting all his ideas. As for Deku, he learned a full cowl, which lets him kick instead of just punch. You heard that right. His first power-up is learning how to kick instead of just beating his enemies with one punch. A lot of fanboys at that time were thrilled with his nothing sauce, calling it the best power-up of all times.
Full Cowl is one of my favorite power-ups in all of shonen anime.
The era of hands is over, the era of feet has just begun, they were proclaiming. In practice, all Deku was doing was not finishing off his enemies with a single punch and instead had to hit them multiple times. He wasn't breaking his arms that often anymore, he still did. But when you can finish a battle with one punch and you can be healed afterwards, there is no point in not just one punching your enemies and be done with it. After that comes one of the best wasted ideas Horikoshi had about this manga. Stain comes in to criticize the hero society and how none of them were actual heroes if all they care about is fame and money. What a great opportunity for the students to realize their world is corrupt and to completely revalue the way they were seeing things. Nothing came out of it. They forgot everything he said and went back to their stupid training arcs, so they will learn how to be attention whores who help people for fame and money. By the way, Deku is plot armored in this arc for the sake of convenience, since he just happens to have the rare blood type that makes him immune to Stain's power. So once again he didn't use his brain to trick his enemy, he was just lucky because of plot. And he didn't one-shot his opponent because he didn't want to break his arms. Although there are no consequences whenever he does that, since he can heal indefinitely and never finds it harder to use his arms, proving why the power-up was just a bullshit way to prolong the fights and not to make them more strategic.
Kohei Horikoshi, the creator of the series, has smartly made Deku's new quirk a double-edged sword. While it is indeed powerful, using it at full strength without the proper training can cause irreparable damage to Deku's body.
The one who actually got hurt the most in the Stain arc was Iida's relevance, since he was the main focus of the arc. Unlike Bakugo and Todoroki, from the previous arcs who got the spotlight and were not shafted afterwards, Iida was never again relevant. Just like Stain, his plot thread went nowhere. What instead went somewhere for a while was the revelation of the use of quirks not being allowed in public without a license. Although it makes sense why you shouldn't use a superpower as irresponsibly, the way it is presented makes absolutely no sense. We constantly see everyone using quirks, willingly or unwillingly. Bakugo in specific used it constantly to torture children and he never got punished. Also, if someone's quirk is passive and he can't turn it off, why is it his fault when it's in effect? Why can't you use your quirk to defend yourself if your life is in danger? It's part of you, so it's not like you bought a gun without a permit, and protecting your life is the most basic right any living being has. Also, why the shit is everyone acting like they didn't know it up until this dogman said it? They all act like it's the first time they hear it when it's supposed to be a law everyone follows for centuries. They also went to school for 12 years and are now part of the Hero Academy? How is it possible not to know about it? The answer is simple. It's a retcon. Horikoshi hadn't thought about it until now, and he needed a reason for why villains are created. It's something important he didn't show in the setting from the very beginning because he's a terrible writer.
My Hero Academia is a masterpiece.
Anyways, like everything else, there are no negative consequences for Deku doing something wrong. They overlook the whole incident just so the protagonist can get away unpunished. What a heroic thing to do. And before you say all classic heroes constantly break the law, they are not public servants who do it for the fame and money. They are vigilantes, something heroes in this setting are not. Thus Deku and Bakugo getting away with it all the time is plain plot armor. Get used to it, since Horikoshi doesn't have the balls to actually do something with his own ideas.
This series breaks the genre's mold.
After whatever message Stein was trying to bring forward gets completely forgotten, we go back to more boring training arcs. Just like before, they are completely tensionless, existing only to showcase everyone's superpowers and one-note personalities. Something which ends up being pointless since only 3 students matter and the rest are filler. At this point the story has become a plotless sex comedy since you get all the usual stereotypes of ecchi anime. Naked underage girls at hot springs, sexy horny cosplayers and transvestites for more queer representation, which I am sure it's not going to invite all the wrong people to the fandom. Does anyone still remember this is supposed to be a manga about heroism? Horikoshi sure doesn't. He was busy stealing ideas from Naruto. There's this angsty kid in this arc named Kota, and he's a carbon copy of a kid from the first arc of Naruto. Coupled with how this takes place in a forest like in the Chunin exam and requires Taku no Jutsu to magically fix years of psychological trauma in seconds, you just can't deny how Horikoshi stole it all from Naruto. At the same time, it's nowhere near as good as Naruto since none of the students will ever die, and it has transvestites for the sake of having them. Also, this whole plot is so stupid. So you have this kid named Kota, okay, who hates heroes, yet he comes to this training mission that is full of heroes. How does that work? His caretakers couldn't leave him home alone, you might think, and yet he spends all his time alone in a cave. This is so much better than leaving him alone in a house with video games and a toilet and a heating system. The reason this kid hates heroes is because his parents were killed by a villain. So why doesn't he hate villains since they are the ones who killed his parents? Maybe he thinks his parents would still be alive if there weren't any heroes. Okay, super. There would only be villains doing anything they like. That way they would never kill anyone and everybody would be happy, not? Later on, a villain attacks this kid and he conveniently happens to be the same one who killed his parents. What are the odds? Wait, this improbability stretches even more. The one who goes to help this kid is Deku, not his caretakers and not any other student, it's Deku, who appears in the nick of time and saves him. Quick, Kotak, run to a casino and be a millionaire, the odds favor you. Actually, no, once again everything happens so conveniently, just to favor Deku. None of the other students ever bump onto where the plot is, and that is why they never matter to the plot. So Deku fights this villain who doesn't make any sense. He has no idea what he's supposed to do, he doesn't follow a plan, he just wants to steal a hat or some bullshit, and then infodumps the goal of the other villains for absolutely no reason. There is no thought put into this guy, he was just created on the fly as a one-note plot device for Deku to come off as heroic. And by the way, initially Deku is unable to win, so does he use his brain or his notebook to get the upper hand? No, he just Texas smashes him by getting a 1,000,000% power boost. It doesn't matter if it wasn't really 1 million, what matters is that he just one-punches his enemies all the time. And after that, Kota magically forgives the heroes because a Taku no Jutsu convinced him that it was the villain's fault his parents died, not the heroes. Well, duh, it was something so obvious from the very start that even if you're a dumb kid could understand it. But Horikoshi doesn't even know how to write dumb kids, and this was the result. Anyways, there are several more chapters about the other students fighting the villains which are not worth going over since they don't matter. The only thing that matters is Bakugo getting abducted, the mass media making a big fuss about it, and the parents talking about removing their children from the academy. This feels like Horikoshi is trying to correct his previous mistake from the first attack of the villains during a training arc. He rehashed the exact same plot for the sake of making the fanboys think the setting is a living, breathing world that reacts to everything that happens. And he constantly made it feel like there are gonna be riots and society will collapse because a student got kidnapped. Well, guess what? Nothing happened. The event is just mentioned on the news and is then forgotten. The parents complained a bit, but still let the children be in the academy, and the villains become a bit more aggressive, but they are dealt with almost immediately. They also discuss the possibility of Bakugo giving up on being a hero and joining the villains, which doesn't make any sense since there are no real heroes in this manga about heroism. Bakugo is the polar opposite of a hero, yet he was accepted in the academy. Who gives a shit if he joins the villains? He's already one and nobody has an issue with it. This is also where they suspect there is a traitor among them that tips the villains. The amount of theory crafting going on at the time regarding who might that be was unbelievable. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter since it was just another plot point that Horikoshi completely forgot about for years. By the time he returned to it, the manga was at its last battle and it didn't matter who the traitor really was. Anyways, the way they found out the villain's hideout was completely stupid. They placed a tracker on a normal that did absolutely nothing in the entire arc. If you bring a super powerful monster with you, common sense dictates that you will use it somehow, you know, to cause havoc and kill someone for a change. Nope, it did absolutely nothing. And on top of that, it didn't realize someone casually walked next to it and placed a tracker in it. This is how threatening the villains are in this manga. So the villains asked Bakugo to join their side. It was another thing that Horikoshi ripped off from the Sasuke retrieval mission of Naruto. Only thing, Sasuke had a reason to betray his village. He wanted to kill his brother. Bakugo has nothing. His life has no real adversity. If anything, he's already a villain for torturing children and then telling them to end themselves. Thus Bakugo refuses, since not only he's already a villain, he's also a prodigy in the Hero Academy. He already has the best of both worlds, so why would he sacrifice one for the other? Thus, this great moment that made Bakugo to come off as a badass once again had absolutely no depth. Also, the villains are presented as complete idiots once again, since their plan made no sense and the whole abduction fuss was pointless. Hey, let's bring him on our side, although he has no reason to do so. Whoa, what a plan! Once again, Horikoshi has no idea how to make compelling adversaries. Next up, the greatest hero fights the greatest villain. Horikoshi hyped them up as much as he could, making it clear that they are the power ceiling of the story. Although it was epic as a fight, it created two issues. First, it once again proved the villains are not threatening, since despite All for One planning for this decades in advance, buffing himself with 1,000 different superpowers and breaking the mental fortitude of All Might, he still lost fairly easily without killing a single hero. What kind of a final boss can't kill a single person even after planning ahead so much and then just loses to the mindless punching of someone who had no plan at all? And the other issue is that this is the power ceiling. Horikoshi made the mistake of stating clear as day that there won't be anyone stronger than them. You don't do that in a fighting shonen, because you let your audience know it's never gonna get more impressive. Most people who like fighting shonen are power-up junkies. They don't want to be told it's never gonna get more impressive, even if it never does. Why do you think Beerus in Dragon Ball is never surpassed in power, regardless of how many power-ups Goku gets? So the power ceiling can never be reached. This was one of the main reasons My Hero Academia began to lose steam after this arc. They reached the power ceiling, thus there was nothing to look forward to in the future. This was also why giving the promise Deku is gonna be the greatest hero right from the start worked so well. Instead of openly telling you he would be a powerless wage slave at the end, everybody thought he would be as powerful as All Might, and thus tolerated the boring training arcs. The aftermath of the battle is once again reminding you why this is a stupid manga. Like a Saturday morning cartoon, the main villain is captured alive and sent to a prison along with every other criminal. What for? It's not like any of them is going to reform. Why not execute them when they are clearly redeemable and spare yourself the trouble? It's almost done so they will escape in the future and cause massive chaos, isn't it? This was also where All Might could have died heroically and Deku could have kept developing without the need of a nepo daddy, thus slowly becoming the new symbol of heroism. But no, he survived because this is a Saturday morning cartoon. Deku didn't grow one bit and remained a nepo baby. The only highlight we get in the aftermath is the notorious room event, where they waste your time showing each other's rooms. Whoa, the one-trait character has a one-trait room that fits him perfectly, I didn't see that coming! Don't you now really care about these nobody characters instead of wasting your time reading about epic fights and high stakes? Obviously not! Everybody was bored out of their minds while reading this crap. This is not character development nor fleshing out, it's a waste of time! You would think Horikoshi had learned by now that his audience actually wants to see some damn battles with villains, goddammit. But no, he was that incompetent, he thought it wanted more training arcs and even more minor characters who don't matter to the story getting introduced. The result was yet another training arc with absolutely none of the hype of the sports festival, since there was no huge crowd to cheer for them and no over-dramatic fleshing out of a specific character took place in it. It was completely boring, and Horikoshi became desperate enough to up the fan service by a few kilotons so the reader base won't give up. Deku is now treated as the lead of a fighting harem. Several girls are hitting on him and he constantly falls on their boobs or sees them naked. Because that is what heroism is all about. We are exploring a theme here, people! The next part is about Bakugo not thinking he's the center of the universe for once and feeling responsible for All Might's retirement. That counts as character development and would normally be a good thing. Unfortunately, Horikoshi is completely incompetent and had this event taking place after a tensionless exercise arc. Why would Bakugo feel sorry about it now and not immediately after he got rescued and All Might retired? Because he failed in a training arc? So what, it's not like he lost anything. He could retake the exam a few months later, and there was no real punishment for his failure, the same way having a fight with Deku didn't have any real punishment. They were just doing chores for a few days and then the whole thing got forgotten as always. Once again, the problem is the complete lack of consequences, making every theme exploration to be completely shallow. That's Horikoshi for you! The complete failure of storytelling continues with the introduction of characters that further destroyed whatever balance there was supposed to be in the power system, and the themes of a story that was supposed to be about heroism despite having no heroes. Mirio is proven to be the one that should have been given All Might's power, but didn't because nepotism. Why would you give a power to the one who actually worked hard all his life and who will do the best with it, when you can have a self-entitled crybaby who demands it just because he doesn't have any powers and never worked hard for them? Also, why would Deku give the power to Mirio even though he knows he will be a far better hero than he will ever be, when he can keep it a secret and act like he deserves it more? I wonder what kind of people this message is going to appeal to.
Trust in Horikoshi.
Then you have Night Eye, who has the power to predict the future. A power nobody asked him to use all this time, even though it would save them a lot of trouble. He predicts All Might will be killed, something which made everyone to expect him to die by the end of the story. It never happened because Horikoshi can't keep up with his own plot threads. He couldn't even make Deku the #1 hero at the end. He made everyone the greatest hero and left Deku as a useless wage slave.
But I have faith in Horikoshi.
And then you have Eri, the lolly backpack that can undo everything, including death. Up until now, every power was supposed to have limitations or a backlash, but with her you basically have unlimited health and power. There goes the power system which many liked at first for being grounded and low level. It became ridiculous, just like any other fighting shonen. Oh, and as always, Deku bumps onto her because he has the writer in his pocket. Nobody else ever bumps onto important characters, and that's why they never matter.
I have a lot of faith in Horikoshi as a writer.
The overhaul arc that follows is very boring and nothing but a pointless series of battles between nobody heroes and nobody villains. I remember the hype in the anime dying out completely at this point, and everyone jumping ship to Demon Slayer, for not being about nobody heroes fighting nobody villains. Horikoshi did a horrible job in making the audience care about the minor characters, so nobody cared who wins or loses in these fights. On top of that, he did not have Bakugo, the only character they cared about, as part of this mission. And on top of that, Overhaul killed a tranny villain, thus instantly making the queers who were still following this trash fire to hate him. They couldn't identify with straight characters since everyone has to be exactly like them. The result of all this mismanagement was 3 manga volumes that nobody liked or cared about.
Trust in Horikoshi.
It got a bit interesting when Mirio lost his powers in a heroic way, but with Eri around he could get them back eventually. And guess what? He did. Everyone knew he would years before it happened. Eri was a mistake. She removed all negative consequences and tension from every fight. She also powered up Deku in that arc so he can defeat Overhaul. Thus once again he got a power without working hard for it. As much as Horikoshi tried to make Deku seem heroic, and to even rewrite his destiny of dying according to Night Eye, it made no difference. Because of the first chapter, everybody knew he would survive all the way to the end and his victory was secured. So yes, Horikoshi was so incompetent he made even his main character to come off as boring. What did he think would happen when Deku hadn't changed one bit all this time? He was plot armored by telling us he becomes the greatest hero, and he was constantly powering up without working hard for it all his life. Mirio's introduction exposed him for the shit he was all along, and thus even Mirio was technically a mistake. He broke the illusion and killed all the interest in the main character.
But I have faith in Horikoshi.
If you thought the Overhaul arc was boring, just wait until you see what comes next. Entire volumes get wasted on slacking around at the dorm, fooling around with brats, and having a jolly time at a school festival. Wasn't this supposed to be a manga about superheroes? Horikoshi says no. I remember there were a lot of fanboys at this point, yelling constantly at everyone who dropped the manga because it wasn't what they thought. Do you only care about fighting? The answer was yes. Don't you want to see the characters getting fleshed out through mundane activities? The answer was no. Don't you want to see Eri smile? Why would they? She killed all the tension with her broken power. The fanboys who complained about the drop in popularity just couldn't understand that the vast majority of manga readers don't read fighting shonen for school festivals. They read them for the fighting. When there is no fighting or when there is no tension in the fighting, they look for something else. And that something else was Jujutsu Kaisen, which began being published around this point.
I have a lot of faith in Horikoshi as a writer.
The only thing My Hero Academia had to show off in terms of action was a minor villain named Gentle trying to ruin some school concert. Despite being a sympathetic anti-hero with a sad past, he simply was not part of an interesting event. He just wanted to film himself being a party pooper, big deal. Why would anyone read this instead of Gojo doing epic shit in Jujutsu Kaisen? Oh, and needless to say, Deku bumped onto him, as he does with any other important character in the series, and it's why nobody else is ever important to the plot.
Trust in Horikoshi.
Next up on the list of bull plot threads, Horikoshi had the brilliant idea to give Deku multiple quirks from previous users, thus becoming even more broken and impossible to relate with. Deku began as a weak boy in a world of super powerful entities. By now, he is the super powerful entity. Everyone else who could challenge him ended up in prison or lost his power. There is nothing to challenge him anymore, and thus he has no appeal. Even the queers didn't like him anymore, because he wasn't a constant victim of abuse, which is the only one of two things they can identify with, the other being non-binary hedonists. By the way, isn't it convenient that this multiple quirk nonsense never happened to any of the previous one-for-all users? The excuse is quirks stockpile with each generation, eventually leading to a singularity that can destroy the world. I am sure this is something that will be dealt with by the end of the story. Spoiler, it wasn't.
But I have faith in Horikoshi.
Now onwards to more boring training arcs where more and nobody students fight each other in tensionless duels. What a great writer Horikoshi is, skillfully subverting our expectations. You would think he would have figured out nobody wants this shit after so many failed attempts, and yet he just kept doing it.
I have a lot of faith in Horikoshi as a writer.
At this point, the heroes haven't done anything cool for several volumes, and Deku is not a victim of constant abuse anymore, making Shigaraki and the League of Villains to be the new underdogs. There was an arc called My Villain Academia, which is entirely focused on the bad guys, trying to establish their rule and be threatening for once. There are many flashbacks that flesh them out. They actually struggle to get somewhere, and they are the ones moving the plot forward. The few remaining fanboys of this trash loved this part because guess what kind of people would still be reading it? They were identifying with the marginalized villains who suffer mentally, were wronged by the world, and want to see it burn. Such lovable people, I am sure they will create a wonderful community free of toxicity and cringe. I am obviously joking, they were the worst community of them all. Nothing but gay shippers and pseudo-communists making fools of themselves 24/7. In case you didn't know, Japan hated this arc because it was nothing but pandering of degeneracy. They don't like seeing self-destructive villains being presented as heroes. They want actual good guys doing actual good things. It's why at this point almost everyone had jumped ship to Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen. The villains there were evil for the sake of being evil. They were not heroic, they got flashbacks a few pages before they died, and they loved being evil. That's what the vast majority of the audience wanted. Not crybabies complaining about society not treating them well, and definitely not the heroes wasting entire volumes in doing absolutely nothing interesting.
Trust in Horikoshi.
Horikoshi thought he could salvage this wreckage by redeeming Endeavor after all the crap he did to his family. Only he didn't. He had been such an awful husband and father to the point it was impossible for the reader to forgive him. Redemption doesn't mean you say sorry after decades of abuse and it's all over. Needless to say, people still hated him. Horikoshi also attempted to make Hawks a double agent, acting like a hero traitor when he's actually working for the heroes all along, but he never gave him much presence and never allowed him to do something major. People only remember him for killing the villain twice, instead of for something he achieved on his own. Needless to say, the fanboys hated him for killing a marginalized person who suffered from mental illness like them. They didn't feel sorry for him, they just wanted to see the world burn, because that's what My Hero Academia had become at this point.
I am so connected to this story. There's so many parallels of things I felt like I've gone through in my life. He's having an absolute mental breakdown, a mental meltdown. This is crazy. This is nuts. I love it. He's been like slowly on the decline in terms of like the last few years now. He is losing it. Yeah. He doesn't really have a core center of beliefs and values. Yeah, he's screwed up here. I love it. He's a sick, sick man. I am rooting for the bad guys. I want to see bad guys win. Yeah. Their own folly is what's bringing them down. Why can't I be the Garo of My Hero Academia? I am the Garo. I want the villains to win. This dude is screwed up. He's screwed up. I mean, we know this already, but I gotta keep saying it. He's fucked up in the head. Mommy, I don't want to be a superhero no more. No. His moral compass of where he's at right now and his overall objectives is lost entirely. You sicko for Neverworld, I guess. He's just grabbing onto any rationale. This is somebody that slipped through the cracks. This is somebody that society and everybody failed him. Seeing that same type of process, that same type of thought into a villain that is a psychopath is what's interesting about My Hero Academia for me. Shigaraki the fucking go!
Next up, heroes and villains clash in what shonen fans love to refer to as a war arc. A huge showdown where everyone fights everyone else and people actually die. Unfortunately, Horikoshi had completely failed to make you care about anyone other than psychotic characters like Bakugo and Shigaraki. Thus, nobody in the reader base cared about who died or who lost a limb or something. There was a scene where a female teacher dies, and despite the students crying, the reader had no attachment to her. She had spent the entire series being nothing more than a slutty prostitute that offered nothing to the plot, so why would anyone care? There is another scene where a bunny hero gets mutilated, and it's the same issue. She was nothing but fan service throughout the story. People were only talking about how thick she was. Who gives a shit if she lost her thickness in battle? Horikoshi never treated her with respect, so why would you respect her? And it's not like the fans respected Horikoshi at this point either. They didn't like the way Shigaraki got a power-up by a scientist who was named after an actual concentration camp. The fanboys had become so sensitive they couldn't even tolerate a name. Needless to say, Horikoshi bended over and changed the name, so his own fanbase won't kill him. That's the kind of people he invited and then was a slave to. What a healthy relationship we got here. He doesn't respect his own characters, which leads to his fans not respecting him. I am sure this is never gonna cause any problems. Relationships aside, the plot was still complete garbage. The villain Dobby reveals his endeavor as a son, and that somehow meant people stopped believing in heroes. This shit made no sense. Why would people lose faith in heroes while they are protecting them from rampaging villains? Why would they believe a mass-murdering villain and not the number one hero? And above all, why does Dobby hate his dad when he didn't abandon him to die as a child? He looked for him and cried for him after he thought he died. Dobby was the one at fault for not revealing who he was all this time, and on top of that revealing the truth in the middle of a war when people fear the villains and need the heroes. If Dobby had revealed the truth during a peaceful period, it would have a huge impact. But at this point it's just one tiny thing during a war arc where people die left and right. So once again, Horikoshi has no idea how storytelling works. Here comes the infamous Dark Deku arc, which everyone praised at first. All the villains predictably escaped from the prison and caused chaos. People lost faith in heroes at a time when they should be in need of them more than ever. And Deku left the academy and was fighting them all alone while being serious and moody. With this arc, the series grew up with us finally. You don't get that in a freaking shonen, it's for adults. That is what the remaining fanboys were saying about it, and were patting each other on the back. Haha, anyone foolish enough to drop the manga is now missing this absolute cinema! Deku finally grew up and stopped trying. He will be the best shonen protagonist here on, yay! And a few chapters later, the students used the power of friendship to convince Deku to return to the academy, and he went back to being a crybaby in a high school. That was the end of Dark Deku. Everything went back to how it was. So much for finally growing up! Did you honestly think Horikoshi would use his ideas properly? He couldn't even introduce Lady Nagant without tossing her to the side in a few chapters. Out of nowhere, there always were assassins who always disposed corrupt heroes before they damaged the reputation of heroism, in a manga that doesn't know a thing about heroism, yet none of them took out Stein or Endeavor or even Mineta all these years, allowing them to destroy completely the credibility of the heroes, thus going against the very reason they exist for. Oh, and needless to say, this plot thread gets forgotten, and the only thing the fanboys were talking about was Lady Nagant's ass. They never respected her because Horikoshi never respected her. Here comes the introduction of Star and Stripes, basically All Might with boobs, and everyone was talking only about her ass. The remaining fanboys were once again patting each other on the back. She's gonna be Deku's new mentor, she's gonna have countless adventures with the other students, she's gonna be the new most lovable character. Have faith, this manga will be amazing! She didn't even manage to get to Japan because Shigaraki killed her a few chapters after her introduction. So much for all the bullshit people thought she would have done in the future. Horikoshi introduced her only as a plot device. She only existed to depower Shigaraki with her death. And by the way, he made her completely broken. How the shit can you lose when your power is to make true anything you say? She could have simply said Shigaraki loses all his powers and she would have won in an instant. Horikoshi couldn't even handle her power properly. And I might as well mention here how Horikoshi is so incompetent, he can't even world build properly. How the shit could there possibly be such a powerful character all this time, and she never did anything, much less how she was not mentioned by anyone when she was All Might's ally. In general, there are supposed to be heroes in every country, and they are never shown doing anything. The world itself is not doing anything. 80% of humanity has superpowers, and absolutely nothing has changed. The story is supposed to take place in the far future, and yet there are no new countries and no new technologies. Everything is exactly like the world we live in today. How the shit is that possible? Because people are not allowed to use their superpowers in public? How the hell does that stop technology from progressing? How can there possibly be no changes in geography when the whole world was in complete chaos while superpowers were out of control and All for One was in charge? We live in an era where a cell phone overheats and airport regulations change completely. Yet the shattering events of My Hero Academia have zero effect despite lasting for centuries? Once again, Horikoshi is proven to be completely incompetent. Here comes the second war arc, which wasn't that far away from the previous arc, so it didn't have the same impact. Yet another thing Horikoshi did wrong. He also stopped caring at this point, since you clearly see him rushing through the side stories. The traitor student is revealed and dealt with in a hurry. Everyone gets power-ups in the middle of battle with absolutely no explanation other than "we are running out of chapters", and there is racism against furries out of nowhere, which is introduced and forgotten in a couple of chapters. Stein is back and did nothing. Gentle is back and he saved some school nobody cared about. Harry is back and she gave Mirio his powers back, just so he won't do anything with them. Needless to say, nothing felt worthwhile. The duels between heroes and villains were whatever, nobody cared about the outcome, and it was rushed so nobody would care even if all these nobody students had been properly fleshed out. Horikoshi failed to even treat properly the two characters he bothered to flesh out. Shigaraki is proven to be mind-controlled by All for One since the very beginning, meaning he never had any free will and never made any choices on his own. His tragic backdrop didn't matter anymore since it wasn't society that mistreated him. It was the main villain who gave him the power. Thus it was all his fault, not Shigaraki's and not society's. On top of that, Shigaraki did not turn against All for One, he did not realize his mistake and join the heroes, and he definitely was not given the chance to redeem himself. He was just brain-controlled by All for One, and that was the end of his story. As for the other character people liked, Horikoshi made it seem like Bakugo got killed, only to be resurrected in a bullshit way a few pages later. What was the point in killing him in the first place? It was a fake-out that lasted a few pages and made Horikoshi to look even more incompetent than before. In the final showdown, All Might attempts to defeat All for One with an Iron Man suit. He fails, and as Night Eye had predicted, dies horribly at the hands of a villain. And of course I am joking. Despite All Might dying non-stop since the beginning of the manga, and despite anyone expecting him to die any minute now, so Deku can grow as a character, it never happened. He survived all the way to the epilogue because it's a show made for kids. Unfortunately for Horikoshi, no kids were reading this trash fire anymore. They all jumped ship to Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen years ago. Only queers and blinded fanboys screaming, "You don't know how to read!" remained faithful, and only because they didn't care one bit about the quality of the plot. This manga is put out of its misery with Deku using all the 50 superpowers he was handed over without deserving them to Texas smash the big bad. The same thing he had done with any other enemy in the entire manga. What happened to the notes you kept, Deku? Hell, what happened to your fame? You became a powerless wage slave that nobody even knows if you exist or not. Horikoshi even retconned what he said about becoming the greatest hero. He changed it to everyone became the greatest hero, which was a lie. Since Deku wasn't doing anything without superpowers, while all the other students did, even Mineta. At the same time, he wanted you to believe you don't need superpowers to be heroic. What kind of contradicting bullshit is this? Deku didn't even bother to raise money and get himself some gadgets, by using his fame as the one who defeated All for One. He did absolutely nothing and was forgotten by everyone, including his friends and his own father. Remember when Horikoshi promised to reveal him before the end of the story? He didn't even do that! How incompetent can this guy be? Anyways, Deku did nothing and just waited for All Might to once again hand him over another superpower in the form of an Iron Man suit, proving once again the Nepo baby he was all along, and that you can't be a hero without superpowers, or that you can't get yourself an Iron Man suit without being rich and famous, thus completely contradicting every single message this stupid manga was going for. The end! And yes, I know there are gonna be 40 more pages in the last volume when it finally comes out, but I don't care. It will be something Horikoshi made just to please the sheepers. This is how it ends initially, and this is the true end. Everything else will just be a retooling imposed by the fans. Now I am free to read all the fanboys in the comments yapping about me not knowing how to read.